Hogwarts Legacy was not only last year's most popular game, one part due to its controversies and the other because, well, Harry Potter. It was also one of my most anticipated games of that year, which I made a video on and has also led to my most popular video to date. It's been a year since I last played the game, so I recently thought it would be a good idea to revisit it, and see how I feel about it 1 year later. Do I like it better? Does it hold up? Or is it worse than I initially thought? Well, I was surprised because I changed my mind on a lot of things. There are a lot of things that I still agree with in my initial video, but now that I've played the game for a third time and with a clearer head, there are still a lot of improvements that I would add to the game. For me, when I first played the game, this was one of the games that I had been waiting for years. Before Hogwarts Legacy was a thing, I would mostly replay the PlayStation 1 versions of the game several times a year to get my Harry Potter fix. I did play some of the later games like Order of the Phoenix and Half-Blood Prince, but the first 3 games on all platforms were the best without a doubt. But now that Hogwarts Legacy was here, we all had the opportunity to visit a close approximation to what we had seen in both the movies and read in the books. It was great. It was clear that the team over at Avalanche loved this world and took great care in designing it from top to bottom. The highlight of it being definitely both Hogwarts, Hogsmeade, and the overall northern region of the map. Upon close inspection, the appreciation and love for this franchise can also be seen in the smallest of details like the animations of magic affecting objects, the moving portraits, when you try to get into another house's common room, among many others. But let's analyze the game in even closer detail. When thinking of the Harry Potter universe and looking at the castle, it's just incredible. It looks exactly as I imagined it to be. When I think of the effort the developers put into it, it's amazing, and I didn't know if I expected it to work initially. It has everything. The moving statues that you can interact with, the little Easter eggs all around the school. The mood changes completely depending where you are in the castle. You have the dungeons, the astronomy tower, the Quidditch pitch, the courtyard, the prefect's bathroom. Credit needs to be given where credit is due. They have done a terrific job with the castle. Hogsmeade was also done incredibly well. In the movies, you don't see much of it apart from a few scenes here and there, but according to the descriptions in the books, it was also quite good. I like the fact that it was fully explorable, there's actual shops you could buy from instead of them being purely there for the world building, and it was actually used extensively in the main plot of the game, making it not only an expected destination, just because it existed in the Harry Potter universe, and because it was close to the school. Right next to Hogsmeade we have the Forbidden Forest as well, which brings a completely different mood change. Hogsmeade is fun and magical, whereas the Forbidden Forest has an ominous and dangerous feel to it from the moment you enter it, which is expected. It's forbidden for a reason. It's riddled with all sorts of enemies like spiders, wolves, poachers, and dark wizards, but also with a few sprinkles of spots depicting a feeling of stillness and peace. However, this being an open world game, the developers had to expand upon what we were already familiar with. If the places I had mentioned were the only ones to be playable, the map would turn out to be quite small, and perhaps the developers would feel a pressure to package everything you wanted to do with the game into a very small portion of the map. The issue is, the more south you go, the less fun the game feels. A lot of mini activities were sprinkled all over the map as a purposeful motivation for you to explore them. However, these feel copy-pasted. There's not much of a change between the Merlin trials, popping the balloons, the astronomy tables, the caves you visit, the castle ruins, etc. They don't feel unique because they aren't. The magic of this game seems to be mostly packaged into the northern section of the map, so naturally every time I found myself south of Hogwarts, it was as if my mind was itching to go back to Hogwarts because that's where I was having the most fun and where the game felt most creative. When you think of the RPG elements in this game, they're just not really there. Yes, you do get to create your character, and you do have dialogue options that are both good and bad, but the issue is that there's no real consequence to them. You don't get to play out the fantasy of being a dark wizard, and it seems like the game always tries to pivot your character into this sort of normal and good person. It just feels a bit disconnected that you could use unforgivable curses in front of other significant characters, and that has no sort of impact on your morale, the way that you are treated by them, and other NPCs. There are no consequences. It's as if everyone is turning a blind eye to your actions, but then condemning the villains for using the same methods. RPG standing for role-playing game is more than just being able to create your character and making it look the way that you want it to. It's about branching paths in the story and being able to shape your character's journey the way you want it to. It's obvious that there would be a limited number of ways in which you could do this, but the issue here, I believe, lies in the fact that you have no control over the outcome of your character, and it's been predetermined as if it were a prophecy. In retrospect, I thought of two options that could have made this game better in this regard, one being a bit more obvious than the other. On one hand, we could create our character, choose our house, and develop our character's path through the choices which would lead to different character relationships, outcomes, and ultimately different endings. And on the other hand, we could have a fleshed out main character with a predetermined story like Harry Potter, which evolves as the plot develops as well. In place of a story written by ourselves, it will be replaced with a story containing internal struggle, difficult choices, but most of all, character development. The gameplay is one of the points where the game shines, specifically the combat. When I first found out that this game had been announced, I wondered the most on how good the combat would be. Mainly because I couldn't think of a game like this which had been done before. There are shooters and medieval games out there which inspiration could be taken from and adapt if you are planning to make a game of a similar style, but there aren't many magic and wand-waving games I can name off the top of my head. Avalanche could have and probably took a certain level of inspiration from the older games with its lock-on systems and even some of its spells, but these old games had very rudimentary combat. Hogwarts Legacy's combat was incredibly fun. There are obvious opportunities where you could choose to use stealth, but the combat is so good that it almost feels as if you're missing out on the actual experience of the game if you did choose to do so. On the topic of the spells themselves, they look great and they were incredible. The issue that I had was with the unforgivable curses. As the name suggests, they are unforgivable and therefore overpowered. The issue with that is that there isn't a drawback for using them, not even some sort of debuff or hindrance to your character. I could almost picture some sort of health reduction or a temporary period where your character would move slower due to the negative effect of using such a powerful spell. Instead, you have a lengthy cooldown instead, which is okay, I guess, but if multiple enemies are already afflicted with a curse and then Avada Kedavra is used on them, it just trivializes the whole combat because all of them die at the same time. The side quests were okay. Some better than others. However, some of them were just your standard fetch quests, find things around the castle and come back to the initial NPC who gave you the quests, etc. Some of them are actually quite fun, like finding little secret rooms, statues that lead you to a cool spot, the Crosswands Dueling Club, Summoner's Court, and one of my favorites, the Broom Racing Time Trials. The better side quests don't really qualify as side quests at all. They are more little side plots you develop as you go through the game. These involve other student companions that you come to know, like Natty, Poppy, and Sebastian. Those quests are clearly more developed and took a considerable amount of time to do in comparison, which makes them more fun and obviously better than the rest. The minigames were okay. By minigames I mean the little side activities like the Merlin trials, the astronomy tables, the popping, the balloons, the bandit camps. Even though the bandit camps were actually fun, they just got old quite fast because they just started getting copy and pasted. They felt like chores after a while. But of all of them, the one that stood out to me as the worst and to many others were the Merlin trials. Why? Well, Merlin trials and how many you've done are directly tied to how much inventory space you have. The problem with this is that after you've done 5, you've basically done all of them. There's not much innovation after that, so it becomes a grind fest and a huge task. The worst part, there's 95 Merlin trials in the entire game. You only have to do 52 of these to achieve the maximum inventory space, but that's still a substantial amount of boring to get through. This being my third playthrough, I basically resorted to selling any useless items in my inventory rather than doing any of these challenges because they were mind-numbing, and I had already 100% of the game on my first playthrough anyway. Just a quick note on the gear. I think it was a useless mechanic in the game. Most of the gear actually looks ridiculous and it doesn't make you look like a student at all. It would make sense if the game was online and you had a rare item or mount you'd want to show off, but here, the item rarity is completely artificial because you find supposed legendary items right, left, and center. Bringing it back to minigames, I never thought I'd do this, but good examples of fun minigames are back in the PlayStation Philosopher's Stone game. You had minigames tied to everything like potion making and learning new spells, which were basically rhythm games. Using Incendio in plants, enemies, even when you visit Gringotts, you'd get to ride the vehicle they use to get to the vault, and it's fun. That's what I had hoped this game would have brought more of, and where it actually missed the mark. These little activities were not fun. They were chores. You don't do them because you want to, but because you have to if you want to make the game more convenient. It doesn't feel rewarding, it feels punishing. But sadly, where the game is fun, like the broom racing challenges, the dueling club, and the summoner's court matches, there was a very limited amount of rounds you could play this for, and then it was simply over. If you don't remember or don't know, the plot begins with us being a late starter in Hogwarts School. We start as a 5th year, and we're special because we can see traces of ancient magic, which becomes significant later, tying in with Professor Fig's wife's investigations prior to her death at the hands of the big baddie of the game, Ranrock. As a late starter, we have to play catch-up with the other students, leading to us having to learn all of our spells and performing extra tasks for each professor individually. Due to our talent, Ranrock and Victor Rookwood are in search of us so that they can find repositories of ancient magic gathered and created by an older teacher at the school, Isadora Morganaugh. There's a bunch more to it, like the Keepers, which were professors at the school during Isadora's time as well, who disagreed with their methods of using magic to take away pain, unknowingly of the consequences of such unexplored magic might have. This is a gist of the story, but there's a lot more details to it. Isadora, both as a character and her plot, were very interesting, although the delivery of the story was a bit lacking. Isadora's story is heartbreaking because when she's young, her brother passed away, leading to her father becoming mute and a shadow of his former self. As a young student of Hogwarts, she expressed desires of taking away the pain of her father, but Professor Rackham had explained that we all experience pain and it is not our responsibility to take away other people's suffering, and that the consequences of such actions were uncharted territory in the realm of magic. As she grew up and became a more powerful witch, she explored and experimented with this magic which appalled her former teachers, now fellow members of staff at Hogwarts, once they witnessed Isadora take away her father's pain in front of them. Long story short, she transformed from someone with the right intentions into someone whom was so obsessed and traumatized by the pain experienced by her family that she started to perform this magic regardless of the consequences on her students, storing this magic in repositories. This led to her downfall when one of the teachers found out and ended with her death. This was an interesting story, but it was told in a very unsatisfactory method, in my opinion. The story gets told in bits and pieces throughout the development of the game, and at a certain point, you even get to find Isadora's portrait. What made this a disappointing find is that we never get to speak with the portrait, as it was destroyed, most likely by one of the Keepers a long time ago. What could have been a great plot point ended up being a dead end. Similar to Isadora's story, we develop a friendship with a student called Sebastian Sallow. Sebastian has a similar backstory as Isadora, apart from some details. Sebastian's parents passed away when he was young, leaving him and his sister Anne orphaned and living with their only relative, their uncle Solomon. At some point, Anne got sick with a curse performed by someone else, which led to her feeling bouts of excruciating pain, which also led her to drop out of school because she was unable to keep up with her studies and recover to full health. Sebastian was determined to help his sister, no matter the cost. But as we know, everything comes at a cost. This led to Sebastian searching for any sort of possible solution, but when researching standard forms of magic wasn't working, his only hope was to turn to the only thing he hadn't tried yet, the dark arts. I won't get into the details, but this leads him to get other people involved, like his friends, in finding more about the dark arts and any artifacts or spells that might help cure Anne. The more and more he went down this rabbit hole, the easier it became to use and be involved in anything dark arts related, which caused the unraveling of unfortunate events Sebastian would never be able to undo. It was a story that, upon most of the community and content made about this game, there seems to be a huge consensus that this should have been the main story because it was complex and you, as the player, get emotionally involved. The funny contrast to the previous two plot points in the game are the villains. There are two main villains. One is Ranrock, the main baddie of the game and the final boss, and the other one is Victor Rookwood, which is a secondary baddie that is a direct descendant from one of the Keepers in the game. They are disappointing antagonists for one main reason, which is there's very little to no depth to their characters and their motivations. Ranrock has some underlying motives that make sense. Him being a goblin who has felt the discrimination and ridicule on the part of wizardkind is, in his own mind, justifiably angry and resentful of their power and position in the world. Seeing that the repositories that Isadora had created only existed due to the cooperation of goblins and their metal work, Ranrock saw these magical containers as his species' right to own them, planning to unleash their power to trump the wizarding community who, in his eyes, believed themselves to be superior to goblins. This was interesting, but we don't see much of Ranrock in-game, apart from a cutscene here and there, and he just seems to be evil for the sake of being evil. Victor Rookwood, however, is even worse and less interesting. He just strikes us as an arrogant wizard looking for power. There's not really any level of complexity to his character. In my eyes, the reason why these villains failed is because a better villain is someone who sees themselves as doing the right thing, or even consider themselves to be the hero. A good example of this was Isadora. She believed she was saving people and could heal the world by taking people's pain away. It was a good action in principle, with much more insidious and darker consequences than she bargained for. This made me think a lot of why Harry Potter was such a memorable story, and why did it resonate with so many people? Why did it become so popular? And I realized it was because this is a story about love and the consequence of the absence of love. Harry was orphaned as a baby and endured scrutiny from his mom's side of the family throughout the majority of his youth until he first started attending Hogwarts. Upon starting school, he made friends and found role models in his professors and built a close relationship with his headmaster, who almost became a father figure in his eyes, someone who was wise, kind, respectable, and worth looking up to. These would be aspects of his life that made it worth living, reminders that no matter how bad or how worse it can get, you are capable of loving and of being loved. This could only be contrasted by his antagonist's story. Tom Riddle, also known as Voldemort, was like Harry, orphaned, and the absence of love or any form of caring was quite prevalent while he was a child. There's a side detail that Tom seemed to relish in inflicting pain in others, even as a child, but hear me out. Tom Riddle becomes a talented young wizard and starts becoming interested in the dark arts. He doesn't make friends like Harry does. The people whom he's surrounded by are merely followers. They didn't care for him, they admired him, or wanted to be like him, which led to Tom Riddle being surrounded by these people, and eventually, these became part of his group of dark wizards. He goes the complete opposite path of Harry, a path of power, violence, and submission through oppression, which in my theory was all set in stone by his abandonment and a desire to be accepted and revered by the use of power instead of kindness. Instead of having friends, he had followers. Instead of being loved, he was feared. And that's why, despite all the followers he gathered, he always walked alone. I hope you enjoyed the video. Subscribe if you did, and let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. I'd love to hear them. See you next time.